Claire Donovan thought she was opening her door to a lost soul when she took in Omar Haddad, a quiet Palestinian refugee seeking safety. But what she welcomed into her home wasn't a man escaping a past. It was a man whose dark secrets were still unfolding. And by the time she discovered who he really was, it was already too late to escape. Claire Donovan had spent the last 2 years trying to rebuild her life after losing her husband to a sudden heart attack. The silence inside her small Manchester home was unbearable, every creak and shadow reminding her of what she'd lost. When she came across a local community post about helping displaced refugees, she hesitated at first. But one name caught her attention: Omar Haddad, a 28-year-old Palestinian man who had lost his entire family during the conflict and was looking for temporary accommodation. His profile photo showed a man with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. Something in his face stirred a deep sympathy in her, the same compassion that had once driven her late husband to volunteer abroad. She told herself she was doing something good, something healing. When Omar arrived, the day was cold and gray. He carried a single faded backpack and thanked her softly, his English broken but clear enough to show gratitude. He seemed nervous, scanning the quiet street as if expecting someone to follow. Claire brushed it off as trauma. She showed him the spare room, freshly cleaned and neatly arranged, and made tea. Omar barely drank it, staring instead at the window like it was a doorway to another world. Over the following days, Claire noticed his politeness, his neat habits, and the quiet way he moved around the house. He never asked for much, always offering to help with chores or fix things that needed attention. It almost felt like having a family member again. For the first time in years, she didn't feel so alone. Yet beneath the calm surface, Omar's eyes often lingered too long on her photographs, his expression unreadable. Claire mistook it for sadness, never realizing it was calculation. Omar quickly became part of Claire's daily life, blending into her quiet routines with an ease that felt almost natural. Each morning, he would wake before her, make coffee, and tidy the kitchen. He never intruded, never overstepped, always seemed to know when to speak and when to stay silent. The neighbors noticed his politeness, the way he carried groceries for Claire or mowed the small front lawn without being asked. They called her an angel for taking him in, and Claire, though embarrassed by the praise, secretly felt proud. She believed she had truly helped someone rebuild their life. As weeks passed, Omar began to take on more responsibility around the house. He offered to handle errands, collecting mail, paying small bills, even walking Claire's dog when her arthritis flared up. His helpfulness was disarming, his calm presence reassuring. Claire had no reason to question his motives. She saw only gratitude and humility, a man grateful for safety after years of chaos. What she didn't see was how deliberately he was inserting himself into every part of her life. Omar studied her habits closely, the time she left for work, the people she called, the letters she received. When Claire wasn't home, he would quietly move through the house, checking drawers and mail, memorizing details most people would overlook. At night, while she slept, he sat by the living room window scrolling through her old photo albums on social media, piecing together her past. He knew about her husband's death, her loneliness, even her small inheritance. To Claire, Omar was a symbol of hope, a second chance at purpose. But to Omar, Claire's home was more than shelter. It was a perfect cover, a place to disappear while the rest of the world searched for the man he once was. It started with the smallest things, so small that Claire almost didn't notice. A silver necklace her husband had given her on their 10th anniversary wasn't where she remembered leaving it. She assumed she'd misplaced it, distracted by her busy week. A few days later, she found her reading glasses in a different drawer, her mail stacked out of order. None of it seemed serious enough to raise suspicion, but a faint unease began to grow. Then came the first strange charge on her credit card statement, a small purchase at a local convenience store she'd never visited. She blamed the bank's error and moved on. But deep down, she felt something had shifted in her home, something invisible but watching. Omar remained the same calm, respectful presence. He smiled easily, asked about her day, and spent hours in the garden fixing the broken fence. Yet there were moments when Claire caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race, not of affection, but of study. One evening, as she poured tea, she heard him outside, speaking rapidly in Arabic on his phone. His tone wasn't soft or emotional. It carried command, like a man giving instructions. When she called out, the conversation ended abruptly. Omar returned inside moments later, expression unreadable, saying he was checking on family in Gaza. Claire nodded, ashamed for even questioning his tone. That night, she found herself staring at her bedroom door, unable to sleep. The house felt different, too quiet, too still. Shadows stretched longer, sounds carried sharper. Something inside her whispered that not everything about Omar's story made sense. Yet she pushed the thought away, convincing herself it was paranoia. She didn't know that by the time she started to question him, Omar had already begun to move one step ahead. Claire couldn't ignore her doubts any longer. The more she thought about Omar, the less his story fit together. He had said he'd come through a charity, but whenever she asked about his time in the refugee camp, his answers were vague and rehearsed. She began noticing his carefulness, how he avoided being photographed, how he tensed when police cars passed on the street, how he always double-checked the locks before bed. Something about him didn't feel like a man starting over. It felt like a man hiding. One afternoon, Claire sat at her computer and searched his name online. Omar Haddad, Palestinian Refugee, Manchester. Nothing appeared beyond a few generic posts about charity programs. No social media, no records, not even a photograph. It was as if he didn't exist before last year. The thought unsettled her so deeply that she began to watch him without meaning to, listening for footsteps, noticing when he went out, counting how long he stayed gone. He always returned with the same calm smile, as if he could sense her unease and enjoyed it quietly. Late one evening, Claire noticed his documents left on the kitchen table. The refugee ID card looked strange, the font mismatched, the lamination uneven. A shadow of a logo at the corner seemed slightly blurred, as if copied. Her pulse quickened. The next morning, she phoned the charity that had arranged his placement. The woman on the line hesitated when Claire mentioned Omar's name, then quietly said his file was under review. Before Claire could ask what that meant, the line went dead. That night, when Omar returned home early, he found Claire at her desk, hurriedly closing a drawer she had just locked. Their eyes met for a single heavy moment. He didn't speak, but his silence said everything he knew. 2 uneasy days passed after that silent confrontation. Omar behaved as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere in the house had changed. He moved more quietly now, and Claire noticed that he kept his backpack close at all times, never leaving it unattended. She barely slept, listening to his footsteps at night, the faint creak of the floorboards outside her room. Fear pressed against her chest like a weight, but curiosity was stronger. She needed to know who he really was. That afternoon, when Omar left for one of his mysterious errands, Claire took her chance. Her hands trembled as she descended into the basement, a space he had claimed as his own storage area. The air was cold and smelled faintly of metal and damp earth. Boxes were stacked neatly, too neatly, as though arranged to hide something. She started moving them aside, her heart hammering louder with each one. Behind a tall cabinet, she noticed a section of wall that didn't match, the paint slightly different, a crack running along the edge. When she pulled at it, a loose panel came away, revealing a hollow space. Inside was a small black case containing several passports, each bearing different names and nationalities, but all with Omar's photograph. Some pages were marked with entry stamps from countries she didn't even recognize. There were bundles of cash, prepaid SIM cards, and folded papers filled with coded notes and numbers. One passport had a faint red stamp at the bottom, Interpol. Claire froze, staring at the seal as the truth sank in. The man living under her roof wasn't a refugee at all. He was someone on the run, possibly dangerous. She snapped photos of everything with her phone, her hands shaking uncontrollably, then hurried upstairs, unaware that she'd already left one small clue behind. That night stretched endlessly, every sound in the house amplified by Claire's pounding heartbeat. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone clutched tightly, ready to call the police at dawn. The images she'd taken from the basement still glowed on her screen, proof that Omar wasn't who he claimed to be. The clock ticked past midnight. Somewhere downstairs, she heard the front door open softly. She froze. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps crept up the stairs, one by one. The door to her room eased open, and Omar stood there, his face calm, but his eyes hollow. In his hand was her phone. He must have seen the photos. For a moment, Neither of them moved. The air was thick with the kind of silence that follows realization, one that could shatter at any second. Omar didn't shout or threaten. He simply said in a low voice that he would be leaving before sunrise, and that she should forget everything she thought she knew about him. His tone was final, cold, and disturbingly polite. He walked downstairs, picked up his backpack, and disappeared into the darkness without another word. Claire stood trembling in the hallway, afraid to breathe until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. When morning came, she called the police, her voice shaking as she tried to explain. By the time investigators arrived, Omar was gone. They searched the basement, photographing the false wall and the items she'd discovered. The passports matched a fugitive wanted across Europe for human trafficking, identity theft, and disappearances that stretched back years. Everything in Claire's home was evidence, but the man himself had vanished. As officers packed up the items for forensics, one of them muttered what Claire already knew in her heart. He had planned his escape long before she ever found that wall. Weeks turned into months, yet Omar was never found. The police traced fragments of his movements, grainy CCTV clips of a man matching his description boarding a train to London, a security camera catching him in a cafe near the docks, and then nothing. It was as if he had dissolved into thin air. Interpol took over the case, linking the evidence from Claire's basement to a smuggling ring operating across several countries. But even they admitted the trail had gone cold. Claire's name appeared briefly in local newspapers, labeled as the woman who housed a fugitive. The attention faded quickly, leaving her with an empty home filled with fear and silence. She couldn't bring herself to go into the basement again. The wall panel was gone now, sealed by police tape, but the memory of what had been behind it haunted her. Some nights, she woke suddenly, sure she'd heard footsteps in the hallway, only to find the house still and empty. She replaced the locks, installed cameras, even sold her late husband's car, afraid Omar might somehow return. But it wasn't just fear that lingered, it was confusion. He'd had every chance to harm her, yet he didn't. He chose to leave her alive. 3 months after the investigation went cold, Claire received an unmarked envelope with no return address. Inside was a single postcard showing a quiet seaside town she didn't recognize. Scrawled in uneven handwriting were 5 words. Asterisk, thank you for your kindness. Asterisk beneath it was a small drawing of an olive branch. The handwriting matched Omar's. The police traced the card to a post office in southern Spain, but there were no fingerprints, no CCTV evidence. Claire still keeps it locked in a drawer, a haunting reminder that the man she once helped was still somewhere out there, watching, surviving, and remembering.